All right then. We'll call the 127th meeting, the 127th Commission meeting of the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations to order. Welcome everybody. Happy holidays. We've got a full contingent today. I know Senator McNally is here, but not back down here yet. But otherwise, with Chairman, we're duly constituted, a full house, and I appreciate you all being here. Anybody have trouble with weather getting in? Just raise your hand if anybody had trouble. Mayor Huffman didn't have trouble. You came early. All right, good. Happy. First order of business then is the approval of the minutes of the October 2013 meeting.
Move approval, Mr. Chairman.
Properly moved and seconded. Any questions, additions, changes? All right, hearing none, seeing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? All right, thank you. The minutes of October 2013 are unanimously approved. Behind tab 2 in your books for today, we have a presentation by Dr. Lippard, our Deputy Executive Director, a discussion of the work program for 2014, and after which we'll require a vote for your approval. Cliff, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Commission members. Let's start the meeting off with what I hope is a nice soft pitch, which is the calendar year, it's only going to get easier from here, the calendar year 2014 work program, tab 2 of your docket books.
As you turn to tab 2, I want to ask our audio technician if there's anything you can do to turn up the
Is that better?
Amplification from that mic so all members can hear. Yeah. Thank you.
I'll try to speak more into it. Is that better? Okay.
But not a lot better, but some better.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go. All right.
That's good.
Just kind of, there we go. Just
That's
no, here. There we go.
There we go. That's good.
Excellent. Very good. So looking at tab 2 of your docket books, as I said before, this is the calendar year 2014 work program, and as the chairman said, I will be asking for your vote of approval at the end of this very brief presentation. This is essentially the same work program you saw and approved at the June meeting when you approved the amended calendar year 2013 work program. The only changes are projects that have been completed since then have been removed, specifically the fire service study and the land use study, both of which were completed and approved at the June meeting and have since been published. The other changes are we've updated the status on particular reports just to bring those up to date. So if you want to use this as a reference document, for example, if you look at the municipal boundary change and comprehensive growth planning project on the first page or page 2 of that tab, you'll see that under status it shows that we will be presenting you potential recommendations, reviewing those tomorrow at this month's meeting, and that there will be a final report is due to the General Assembly in January, though it's possible that there may be a recommendation for an extension. So we have similar updates for each of the projects that are in the work program. After your approval of this work program, we will be bringing you back an amended program at our June 2014 meeting. That amendment will include any new projects sent to us by the General Assembly, as well as any projects that the Commission itself wishes us to adopt.
Thank you, Dr. Lippard. I'll entertain a motion that we approve. Thank you, Mr. McMahon. Properly moved and seconded. Chairman Sargent. Any questions? Senator Henry, you're recognized.
If during the year the commission decides to alter, amend, or amend any of these proposals for the program, do we have the power to do that, or is this set in concrete as right now?
Technically, Senator Henry, they need to have our blessing to do that, and they could do so either at our January meeting or more likely at the June meeting thereafter.
I mean the commission itself.
The commission can do it.
Thanks.
I say so. Yeah. All right then. There's a motion properly made and seconded before us. If no further discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? Well, the plan of work is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, then behind tab 3, waste not, want not. We have the water and wastewater rates draft report for review and comment. This is not for action today. Ben, good to see you.
Oh,
thank you for being here. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to guide us through this sort of complex subject with a PowerPoint presentation.
Keep that mic right close to your mouth.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I hope y'all have the slides in front of you there. We've got a set of colored slides that we'll guide through on this with. Getting right into it, the House Local Government Committee sent HB 600 to the Commission for study. HB 600 put a topside cap on water and sewer rates for customers of the Johnson City, for customers of the Johnson City Water and Sewer Department that resided in Sullivan County but were outside the city limits of Johnson City. The cap is in the bill is stated in terms or in relation to what the Johnson City inside customers pay for water and sewer. Outside rates in Sullivan County would be capped at 150% of inside rates. As it stands right now, those outside rates are 200% of inside rates. Now, there are also customers of Johnson City Water and Sewer who are in Washington County, Carter County, and Unicoi County, although I believe in Unicoi County it's only water and not sewer. But anyway, those customers in those other counties will not get any rate relief from this bill. Now, most of the rest of my presentation will develop a statewide perspective on the issues with outside water and sewer rates. In the draft report before you, there's a lot of the pros and cons of HB 600 in the context of Sullivan County. There's sufficient data in the report and the appendix where you can draw your own judgments about the merits of seeking rate relief for these particular set of customers in Sullivan County. I'm going to show you the data on this slide. Oh, wait, I'm getting behind myself here. That's what I've already done. We'll show you this data from the appendix of the report so you don't have to shuffle through and look for it. If you're inclined to make comparisons between Johnson City and the other figures statewide, here are the Johnson City figures, 1931 for 5,000 gallons a month inside and 3862 for 5,000 gallons a month outside. I'm not going to repeat all the pros and cons of HB 600 in this presentation. I'm going to take my time to try to give you a statewide perspective on the issues with outside rates. Now, just to be clear from the very start, in the draft report, we have a statement that the Commission does not recommend HB 600 in its present form. This recommendation is justified primarily by the many unintended consequences of setting caps, and I'll discuss more of that later. Next slide. I'm going to stick to comparisons of inside and outside water rates primarily, say very little about sewer rates specifically. The data presented in this report shows that outside rate issues for water and sewer are very similar. The comparisons between water and sewer rates are less important from a policy perspective than the differences between inside and outside rates. Also, about 280,000 customers statewide pay outside water rates, while only 60,000, I say only, that's a lot of people, but still 60,000 pay outside sewer rates. Now, the text balloons on this slide show some pretty large regional variations of inside water prices. We had the supposition that we would see this kind of regional differences. As we gathered the data, we sorted it into these 5 geological areas: the alluvial coastal plain, which is West Tennessee; the Highland Rim, which is that blue area that circles the Nashville Basin in the middle; and the Cumberland Plateau and the Ridge and Valley section. So our data was broken into these geological regions. Now, what we found was that the greatly differing geological conditions of our state definitely affect water prices. All water prices are compared here using a typical household usage of 5,000 gallons per month. That's a generally accepted rule of thumb. The Highland Rim and the Cumberland Plateau cities have the highest regional weighted average water prices for a variety of reasons, including geology. Those prices on the Cumberland Plateau are 50 to 75, the Highland Rim and the Cumberland Plateau, 50 to 70% higher than in West Tennessee. That's the biggest contrast. West Tennessee prices are the lowest in the state, mostly due to massive and easily reached aquifers. These aquifers are the Memphis Sands and the relatively untapped Fort Pillow Sands, which lie below the Memphis Sands. The Nashville Basin and East Tennessee have inside water prices that are in between the two extremes. Now we get into more of the main topic here, comparisons between inside and outside water prices. I'm not going to give you all the possible comparisons. There's any number of them. I'm going to give you some of the ones that I think are more interesting. I'm going to do this by putting the outside water prices over the inside water prices in a ratio for each region. Now, I'm sorry I didn't put that ratio up on the slides, but I'm going to tell you what the ratio is in each region. Thinking about the water rate cap of HB 600, the Cumberland Plateau is the only region where outside water is generally priced less than 150% of inside water. The ratio of outside over inside for that region is 137%. So what that means is, not if you applied HB 600 type caps to all the cities in that region, you get very few people that would really see any benefit from that. And even though you'd see very little benefit, that's still got pretty high outside prices in the Cumberland Plateau. Now in the Nashville Basin, I have to explain that there's a bit of aberration in the numbers. The customer weighted average ratio of outside over inside is 217%. That is because we've got 330,000 Nashville inside customers that are paying fairly low rates, and we've got a much, much smaller number of regional outside customers in cities like Franklin and Lebanon. As a matter of fact, only 9,000 that are paying just moderately higher outside rates. So the ratio there is a little surprising if you do it yourself, and it's not representative of the rest of the state because of the large number of Nashville customers. Now, in West Tennessee, the Highland Rim, East Tennessee, those numbers are more representative of inside-outside ratios. For these three regions, the ratios are in a tight range of 166% to 171%. That's pretty tight. And it's pretty typical of the markup for outside customers on a statewide basis. So you'd have to say that those regions are really more representative of the state. Now, introducing another layer of comparisons by adding utility district water prices in the bottom in red. Now, the comparison between municipal outside rates and utility district prices are considered to be more of an apples-to-apples comparison because of the similar customer densities outside cities and in utility districts. And here we do see a very close correspondence across all regions between outside prices as compared to UD prices for 5,000 gallons a month. The differences in outside prices compared to UD prices are less than 45 cents across the Highland Rim and East Tennessee. Differences in the Nashville Basin and West Tennessee are less than $2.50. And where you got that biggest contrast on the Cumberland Plateau and the highest water prices, you've only got a difference of $6 between UD prices and outside prices there. So what we supposed would happen has happened, that those UD prices are more generally comparable to the outside prices than the outside are to inside. Now, here's where we begin to get into describing where the rub might come in these outside rates. Outside water prices that are significantly greater then the outside averages or UD averages for their region can be expected to generate some requests by customers for explanations. Why are we paying a lot more than, say, UDs or other outside customers in our region? There are many smaller cities that have outside water prices higher than regional averages, so that would probably be a fairly common question. But the real concerns come when, and are likely to be magnified, when we've got these greater prices greater than regional averages, and at the same time, you've got big markups from inside to outside. We identified 20 cities that charge outside rates which are 200% or more than inside rates. And here are the indicators of potentially controversial outside rates. 20 cities with markups of 200% or more. 13 of those 20 cities have rates exactly double the inside water rates, and giving the impression that there might be an arbitrary markup. I hesitate to use the term arbitrary because that's a legal term that would really leave the impression that those are not in accordance with the law. But they do appear strange that the cost of service would be exactly 200% more outside. Outside water prices for 16 of the 20 cities are also higher than regional averages, and that's not a favorable comparison for any of those 16 cities. They've got high markups, and they're beyond the regional averages for outside prices and UDs. Now, there's one other important measure of water rate fairness that we looked into. Families at the lower range of household incomes can have water bills with seriously strained monthly budgets. We cover this in the report because we found that 41 of 195 municipal outside rates produced water bills that are higher than industry standards for what's affordable. Now, affordable's been looked at a lot. Affordable's been looked at by EPA in terms of what's affordable in terms of applying technology in smaller cities. So affordable has been discussed on a national basis for several years. The dashboard that we're using up here was developed by the University of North Carolina Environmental Finance Center. It's used in North Carolina and several other states. These dashboards set affordability threshold of the monthly water bill at 1.5% of median household income. Now, we tested this and found that 41 of the cities were tripping over this threshold into what would be the red zone on this speedometer, you might say. There's a yellow zone that's from 1% to 1.5%. That's really considered to be the caution zone. So we're saying there's 41 cities already in the red zone. Now, this year, the U.S. Conference of Mayors has joined with 2 other national organizations to publish one of the best guides on drinking water's affordability and getting that analysis right down to the neighborhood level to see what the impacts are. Now, my next slide says the search for solutions, because we've sort of identified that there's some pretty good indicators that there's a statewide problem with some of the outside water rates. We say here that one size may not fit anyone. We might have just as well said one size cap may not fit everyone. The previous slides provided indications that up to 57 cities are moving into a caution zone with their outside water rates. That's the 16 cities with 200% markups and rates over regional averages, and the 41 cities that are tripping over affordability issues. And there may be some double counting between those groups, so don't take 57 as the gospel. Now, the big question is, can we develop policy recommendations which would lower tensions across the state about outside rates? The big thing we have to consider is that local conditions influencing outside rates are highly variable within all regions and across all regions. Given the varying population densities, sizes of utilities, ages of the distribution lines, on top of the complexities of geography and geology, there are really many reasonable justifications that rates could be 200% or more. And this complicates the search for solutions to curb water rates that might be judged to be insensitive to customers. Top-down solutions are generally insensitive to variable local conditions. And let me move to the next slide while we talk about top-down solutions just a little bit. A water rate cap applied statewide in Florida has had the unintended consequence of becoming a standard rate adopted by many cities. Now, Wyoming allows outside rates to exceed 125% of inside rates, but only after the utilities develop cost of service studies proving the need for much higher rates. And Catherine, behind me, talked to the folks in Wyoming and found that lots of cities had set outside rates right at 125%, so they don't have to go into these cost of service studies to justify their higher rate. And finally, it's pretty easy to visualize that a private act cap like HB 600, once you pass that by the General Assembly, it could trigger any number of copycat bills. Let's see. Well, I'm going to stay with this slide just a minute. Historically, customers challenging water rates in court have had very high hurdles to clear to be successful. The burden of proof falls heavily on customers who must show that their rates are either arbitrary or capricious. And these judicial proceedings, they're costly and not likely to be successful, and they're only going to address the rates that are the most egregious. Solutions short of court proceedings are needed. We've looked a little bit at top-down solutions. A lot more in the report you'll see a discussion of top-down solutions, and found that they're insensitive to local conditions and create unintended consequences. So this report comes down pretty heavily on the side of what I'm calling customer-focused solutions. And we show that there are customer-focused solutions which are not brand new. And what is recommended here is that water and sewer customers of cities should be given some avenues of influence rate setting that are similar to the avenues that are already available to customers of utility districts and to customers of investor-owned water utilities. The customers of utility districts can appeal certain issues to the Utility Management Review Board in the Office of the Comptroller. And the Tennessee Regulatory Authority hears appeals from customers of investor-owned water utilities. I'm going to have to get a little water. Now, municipal water boards, we're going to first talk about adding representation to municipal water boards. The water boards now are either appointed by the city governing body, or the city governing body itself chooses to sit as the water board. Municipal water customers, neither outside nor inside, have the same types of customer-friendly influences on water board rate decisions that utility district customers enjoy. Now, of course, the inside customers of these water boards that are voters, they have some leverage. In sort of indirect leverage, but the outside customers who are not voters have very little, if any, leverage to influence these decisions. We're going to get into appeals processes next, sort of at the end of this presentation, but before we do that, let's consider what the benefits of representation on these boards might do about appeals. Representation might really lessen the need for appeals if we set that up right. Board representation of outside customers might be done similar to the representation of extraterritorial areas on regional land use planning commissions. 2 outside planning commission members are appointed by the city if the urban growth boundary outside the city is more than half the entire planning area. If the outside area is less than half, then one member is appointed to the Regional Planning Committee and represents this extraterritorial area. So that creates a precedent for bringing these outside people onto board decision making. Alternatively, there might be customer representation on the water board that's proportional to the percentages of inside and outside customers. But before you consider that, you should know that 44 cities have water systems where over half of their customers are outside. Now, in this report, we don't come down to the bottom line of recommending what type of representation or how much, but we do point out that there's some precedents that could be used here. Now, collateral benefits of representation, I think I've talked about some of these, is that procedures would be more sensitive and responsive to customer needs, lessens the need for appeal processes, utility management more likely to generate needed cost of service, data required by customers, and greater likelihood of fair and more equitable rates. And the last slide here where we begin to talk about rate relief and appeals. This is a process beyond the board decision making where people are still dissatisfied with decisions made by the board. And this looks like this slide is trying to show you how the whole world works on one slide, but I'm really trying to draw your attention to the boxes, the yellow boxes at the lower right-hand corner. And that shows you that the Water Wastewater Financing Board does not provide any customer-focused services to the customers of cities in the same way that the Utility Management Review Board does for customers of utility districts. And the extreme right-hand corner, lower right-hand corner, the customers that reside outside the cities have no appeals processes, so potentially they're the most vulnerable to unreasonable water rates. The proposal here is that we consider changing the duties of the Water Wastewater Financing Board to include some customer-focused services in terms of appeals, maybe appealing water rates, quality of service, and things that are similar to the Utility Management Review Board. Last slide sort of just sums up in short order all of the different recommendations. HB 600 not recommended in its current form. Some means of ensuring inside-outside rate differential are fairly set. Either representation on the City Water Board or some appeals process, most likely through the Water Wastewater Financing Board, or a combination of both of those things. So I guess what we're saying is HB 600 does not look like the very best solution to this, and since we have the indicators of a statewide problem, there may be better systemic solutions to this problem.
Thank you, Ben. I'll open it up for discussion. We don't have to vote on the report today, but I do want to publicly thank Representative Hill for bringing this to our attention. And I think when he presented at the last meeting, even he was quick to acknowledge that, you know, he did it for this purpose, that he'd be happy to have the General Assembly improve upon what he put before us. And there have been several members who have raised related issues in the past, but this report, I think, does a very good job focusing our attention on some of the challenges, if not inequities, in the current system, both from a cost and a representation point of view. Mayor Beets, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to one slide, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but it's this one that here, Bill.
Which?
It starts at 20 cities with outside markups. Okay. And I'm sure it's in the report somewhere, and I've overlooked it, but how many cities did you look at before you got to 20 there? You know the number of cities?
Well, we looked at all the ones we could find a record that they had a water system. How many was that? 252? 252 have both water and sewer, or water, either water or sewer. 200 have water.
So it's about 10%?
Yes, sir.
About 10% of cities have outside markups of 200% or more.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor. Senator Henry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The whole report seems to be built on this idea of affordable. Affordable is a subjective word.
Subjective.
But I know what's affordable. You know what's affordable to you. I don't know what's affordable to you because I don't know your entire economic situation.
Yeah.
How can that be used objectively?
We're focusing this on the lower ranks of income strata, and 1.5% of median household income as applied to the ones that are at the bottom.
Okay, thank you.
I need to be my recollection refreshed on the baseline state law, and it may be right here in the report, but Lenise and I were talking about our discussion at the last meeting, and maybe Representative Carter or somebody brought up the fact that the state law mandate is that what? The current law, that the systems have to be self-sustaining.
Yes.
Once
there's extended outside, that outside extension needs to be self-sustaining too.
And so the challenge is for it to, sort of to Senator Henry's question about what's affordable. I mean, the corollary there is it has to be self-sustaining, but then the question is, well, what does it take to be self-sustaining, and are those residents, those citizens being charged more than it takes to be self-sustaining? There is not a prohibition, is there, in state law against making a profit?
Yeah,
it seems we discussed that.
That's actually brought up in the law that you're not allowed to make a profit, but there are certain things like payments in lieu of taxes that can be passed on to the city, and that's recognizing that there's legitimate support between the city and the utility. Sure. But as a profit, I think it actually says profits have to be returned to ratepayers.
That's what I'm trying to recall, and I'm just wondering, and if it does this already, I apologize, but in this draft, could we not set forth at the outset what the current law requires?
Yeah.
As a baseline.
Bring it together in one place.
Right here at the beginning, so that then as we go through the report, we have that context, that here's what state law requires and here's what it prohibits, and so let's see what's happening.
I think it's in there. I think it's just scattered.
I think it's scattered.
Yeah.
So if we could condense it and put it all together, whether it's by footnote or otherwise at the forefront, I think it puts everything in a more useful context for understanding what follows. I'll yield to Brother Doss.
Just a quick question. You said that the area outside has to be self-sustaining as well as the area inside. Are those aggregated? Can the outside support the inside to make them all self-sustaining, or are they separate?
We had that debate in our own team. And I'd say the law appears to be a little nebulous in that area.
Well, I remember last time there was some discussion saying that it was very difficult to separate the prices, to separate cost, and because the facility was thought of as a unit. So
one reading of that part that says outside must be self-sustaining, one reading or interpretation of that could mean that each individual extension needs to be proven upon self-sustaining basis.
Well, if that's the case, wouldn't it be possible then to make some determination about how self-sustaining this is and to set those rates vis-a-vis the inside rates? If we know what those separate units are and what it takes for each one of them to be self-sustaining, we should be able to make
If you've done a cost of study to do that, conceivably, at each and every extension, if you've done cost of service studies of that extension and to show it's self-sustaining, yes, conceivably you could. But I think folks are possibly taking the easier way of just sort of determining this.
Mayor Huffman of Tipton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we say sustainable now, what we're talking about is you have to have enough money to repay the debt.
Yeah.
But you also have to fund 100% depreciation
Got to
as
fund
well.
depreciation.
Both of those have to be in there.
Yes, sir.
Be self-sustaining.
Right, and even after the funding depreciation, you've got to show some increasing net assets too, or you'll be in trouble with the Water Wastewater Financing Board, or Utility Management Review Board. If your annual net assets start going down, you're going to come under board jurisdiction.
But you've got 3 years to correct that.
I believe it's 2 years now, isn't it?
So 2 years.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, in your North Carolina study where you did the dashboard,
Yeah.
does North Carolina have that same standard?
Yeah, I mean that was their dashboard.
But they have to fund 100% depreciation as well as the debt.
When you mean the depreciation standard? I thought you were talking about the 1.5% of MHI depreciation. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that in all of the environmental finance studies of the University of North Carolina, they always include depreciation in determining whether rates are adequate or not. But I don't know the official policy in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Mr. Shumpert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I remember last time, the real issue that started all of this, this present law says that you are to determine the cost to provide that service outside. But there seems that's not done always. They just double the rate. And so you don't have a basis to know, are you overcharged or not? I mean, that seems like that was the basis of the real complaint.
That was one of the main things we heard from the folks in Piney Flats in the Johnson City situation, that they had asked for specific data that would show their cost of service and see if it justified 200% markup.
And the state law required that cost being or not?
I'm afraid it doesn't. It has this more nebulous language of saying that outside services need to be self-sustaining.
But you never have to show that as a water district.
I haven't found a real specific requirement for those kind of data. If someone else knows about that, please let me know, but I haven't found it yet. Yeah. We did give some thought to having the commission recommend a more overt statement of what would be required for outside cost accounting, but that seems like that might place a pretty high burden on some cities that wouldn't need that burden.
Although just 200% is easy.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Let me recognize Vice Chair Rowland, Senator Henry, and then Representative Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ben, for a good report. One comment I would have, that where you specifically provide, or you have written here, for customer members of the board, in Cleveland we have 5 members of our Public Utility Board, and they're all customers. That doesn't include the outside folks. So with 5 members, if our outside customers are 6%, we added one of those members to represent outside, we would be taking up 20% of our board. So I guess it's different application for every situation.
I think so, yeah. And some of those cities, I mentioned 41 cities have more outside customers than they do inside customers. In that case, if you did it proportionally, you'd be turning over more of the destiny of the city to outside customers than to inside, and I don't know how that would work.
You're right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Henry.
Thank you, sir. On your appeals page here,
Yes, sir.
there are 3 agencies which conduct appeals and 1 agency which could conduct appeals if the law said to. Do any of those 4 agencies, does the law provide any of those 4 agencies a further appeal to court for passion, prejudice, caprice, whatever such right?
I believe even past these boards, you can take the case to Chancery Court.
You can? Oh, well, yeah. Okay, so if you show one of these boards has made a basis of finding on a capricious or unreasonable basis, it was unreasonable enough, you go to court with it.
Well, it depends on whether you're the plaintiff or the defendant. I guess you're talking about the city being the defendant, and the board decides it's arbitrary and capricious. They might want to take it to court.
Okay, well, it could go either way.
Yeah.
You can either say the city's being capricious in what they're charging, or the city's not charged enough to keep up the waterworks or whatever the law requires.
I think either way, you'd have the Chancery Court to go to.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
And have another layer. These layers here in this slide, represented in this slide, are trying to remedy some situations short of going to court, and we've got that pretty well in place for customers of the utility districts, customers of investor-owned utilities, but we don't have it in place for customers of city water departments.
Senator Albright of Hamilton.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Carter, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last night I got in late because I was at an Eastside Utility District meeting, and while there I was being lobbied on today's lecture, and you've done a great job, and I appreciate that. It's a difficult thing to understand. So I said, guys, don't tell me how to vote. Pick an area and tell me what you've done. And they said, well, let's take Cleveland. I said, yeah, let's take Cleveland, because Mayor Rowland is on there and we all respect him. We provide, gladly, anytime, before anyone. It was amazing the complexity that they had gone through, running the line 18 miles. During that point, Dalton, Georgia wanted to jump off, but they needed a tower. Dalton said, let us build the tower so you don't up our rate. I can go on and on and on. They figured everything down to the end. And when I said, okay, what markup do you send to Mayor Rowland because of going out of our area in this trouble? 2.17% over what everyone else in Hamilton County is charged. And I said, have we forgotten anything? And he said, no, I think it's worked out just about right. Remember, we're not here to make a profit. We're here to stay solvent. And so I thought that was the very methodology that we call him Duck. That's because he runs a water company. But the very methodology he'd gone through made perfect sense to me. There was a reasonable basis for it. I expected it to be 25, 30, 40, 50% because of the enormous numbers I've seen here. But as quickly as I could add it up on my phone, I came up with 2.17% increase is what the recipients up in Cleveland have to pay in addition to the people we sell to in Hamilton County. And Dalton, Georgia pays a little under 2.17% increase, a little better deal than Cleveland because they spent the infrastructure cost of building the tower. And so I thought that was, and it made perfect sense to me. I don't know if that relates to you all here today, but
I think
I was stunned with the difference in what we're seeing around the state with what we saw. Of course, we think Cleveland are good neighbors, and we want to help them. So that's where we are.
I think you're hitting on an important point, and it's sort of the point Mr. Doss was getting to, too. When you have these big projects and you're making maybe a big extension beyond the city limits, that does bring forth the interest in creating these financial analysis that prove whether it's going to work or not and be self-sustaining. But after years go by, after that's done, and it's in place, you know, we may lose that focus on what the real sustainability of that is. We may have already paid for it, but we keep paying for it through these higher rates without doing a cost of service analysis.
One of the things I forgot to say was because we went outside of Hamilton County into Georgia and back into Bradley County, we received funding through the Farmers Home Administration. And I'm told, I haven't read it, but I'm told in that very lengthy loan document, we agreed to certain restrictions on upping rates going outside the area, that we wouldn't use federal funding to mistreat our brothers in Dalton and in Bradley County, and that we had to prove that what we had done was reasonable. I asked if we'd ever been challenged on that, and he said, no, nobody's ever brought it up. So I assume if we had presented to the mayors of Dalton or Cleveland some outrageous price, they may have had some redress. You borrowed the money promising you wouldn't do it, and you've done it now. But I remember Williamson County talking about what great cooperation they have there, so I think we have that there with our water companies, and we don't want to make a profit. We just want to stay. Financially viable, and I mentioned it to the mayor before we started this morning. I think they're well pleased with the service and the rate. So, anyway, lots of moving parts went into the decision as to what to charge Cleveland, but it's less than 3% is the final tally.
Senator McNally seeks recognition, but Mayor Rowland's name was called. Senator McNally yields.
In a nice way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I might just note for the record that Eastside utility rates to their customers is an identical rate that we charge our outside customers to the penny. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Rowland. Senator McNally, you're recognized.
Thank you. Is there any consideration given, Ben, to the liability that the city or the taxpayers of the city have, for example, were there to be a big lawsuit or default or anything like that, when providing services outside the city? Those outside the city, I think, would be exempt. But in figuring that sustainability, is that calculated in at all?
I think that's a very legit, one of the many legitimate reasons why you might charge a higher outside rate, that the city residents have some liabilities that the outside folks wouldn't have. We also have heard from Johnson City that because the citizens backed what's called double-barrel bonds, their property tax rates are subject to going up, whereas the property tax rates of the outside folks aren't subject to going up. There's some legitimate arguments there. The thing that keeps those dire circumstances from ever emerging is that we've got the Water Wastewater Financing Board looking at the net assets every couple of years to make sure we aren't getting in that kind of financial trouble.
And I guess the alternative for a person outside the city that exists under law now is strictly to go to court.
That's the only one we found.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator McNally. Yes, Representative Carter.
My understanding is the law requires the utility district to stand good for itself. An example, when Hamilton County's Water and Wastewater Treatment Authority borrowed money to expand under a federal program through TDEC that we had to comply with, the county's bonding was not allowed to be used. We had to go borrow the money based on the number of our ratepayers. We had to be self-sustaining. If it fails, Hamilton County owes nothing. And we were told that was the law, and that we even drove up and met with the comptroller because Hamilton County had just gone to a AAA bond rating. Yep. And if we could have piggybacked onto that, we could have saved our ratepayers a substantial amount. But we were told we had to float it based on our own income from our own ratepayers and that the county would not fall responsible. Well, the statute says that. It must be paid by the ratepayers alone. So
Johnson City, utility districts. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no backup. Whose general obligation backup would you have? A county's maybe, or?
Well, we wanted to because we'd have got much more favorable finance. Yeah. But I got shot out of the saddle and I couldn't do that. So that's my understanding that
apparently cities
are responsible. The bond, the ratepayers, whether inside the city or outside of the city, are responsible for the bonds, not the municipality in which it's located. And I think we've got somebody from the comptroller's office here that can correct me if I'm wrong.
Johnson City did come in with their testimony and say that some of their infrastructure is funded with bonds that are backed by both the full faith and credit of the city and the revenue coming from the utility. Is that your understanding too? Joyce Welburn is staff to Utility Management Review Board and Water Wastewater Financing Board.
Ms. Welburn, you're recognized.
Thank you. Didn't expect to speak today.
And speak right into the microphone.
You've got a county system, a water authority, and a utility district, and a city. 4 different entities, 4 different sections of the code. A water authority and a utility district are revenue-backed bonds, strictly from the revenues of the system. The cities and counties can do the double-barrel debt with the tax and revenue bonds. Does that answer the question?
I believe it did. Have you, Ms. Welborn, since you're at the podium, have you seen or heard anything here today that you'd like to comment upon, or any suggestions? We're not voting on this as a final report today.
I just know if you add additional work to the Water and Wastewater Financing Board for complaint procedures, it's probably going to put a huge fiscal note on it, because we're going to have to add additional staff.
Do you think they can comply with the spirit, if not the letter, of the current law without doing so?
Probably not.
That's interesting, isn't it? Thank you. Senator Henry, you're recognized.
Ma'am, while you're at the mic, have you all ever been taken to court on any decision?
The Water and Wastewater Financing Board has been taken to court by the City of Mount Juliet. It has been tested all the way to the State Supreme Court, and the authority of the board has been upheld. For the Utility Management Review Board, we are currently in court on 2 or 3 different cases.
So one case you won, one case is pending, right?
Correct.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Shumpert, I'm sorry. Hang on, we'll come back to that, Ben. Let me recognize Ms. Shumpert.
You say there's 4 different ways. It could be a city, county, water authority, or
utility district.
Utility district. Are they about even? I mean, are there? What's the prevalent type? A utility district, or is there?
There's about 180 utility districts. 300 and something cities, well, 200 and something with utilities, 15 county systems, authorities, a handful.
How many city systems did you say?
250, is that what y'all looked at? Yeah. About 250.
All right, Representative Haynes. So the chair's suggestion is that up front we provide a summary of the law with a reference to the relevant sites that sort of sets the stage. What else would the commission like to see done in the report, if anything, between now and, I presume, if there aren't many changes, it'll be presented at our January meeting for final vote. But anything else in the way of footnotes, anecdotes? You might consider some of the discussion you've heard here today, Representative Carter's examples, whether we want to footnote some of that. I leave to your discretion. Yes, sir. Mayor Bragg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know in the city of Murfreesboro, we're served by the utility district, which has a lot of rural residential, but many, many city residents, and their rates are significantly higher than Murfreesboro's are. So possibly the only suggestion I would have is, if you look at rate relief, or if you look at cost of services or those kind of things, that you also consider there are some city systems that charge much less than a utility district, even in an urbanized area, and that would make a difference.
Capiche, you got that? Ben,
yes, where you got utility districts coming into cities and serving, and having that big contrast between the UD prices and the inside city prices, we need to give that some thought. I guess the same principles will still apply. We feel that there needs to be some way of assuring that we get fair and equitable decisions, and maybe this representation thing on CUD has some application. I'm not sure. We'll discuss that in-house.
All right, great discussion. Good report, great presentation. Thank you. We'll look forward to the final report and action thereon at our January meeting. I'm not going to say that. That's tomorrow's discussion. Thank you, Ben. Our next topic is behind tab 4. Insurance in lieu of surety bonds, Senate Bill 624 by, I can't make that out. We have a draft report here for further discussion. Nathan Shaver is going to make the presentation. I know that this has prompted some discussion as recently as this week about alternatives. Representative Carter is interested in some alternatives, I think, to what this has prompted some thought that suggests some alternatives. But Nathan, why don't you proceed and give us the report as we have it. No vote is anticipated today, but we may talk about some of the penumbras and emanations from this report.
Okay.
You're recognized.
Good afternoon. I'm Nathan Shaver, a researcher at TACIR, and I'll be presenting our report on Senate Bill 624 for review and comment.
Get uncomfortably close to the mic.
There we go. And I'll be presenting our draft report on Senate Bill 624 for review and comment. This bill was originally sent to the Commission by the Senate State and Local Government Committee with instructions to study whether insurance would be a suitable alternative to the individual surety bonds that are currently required by state statute for certain local public officials. First, I'll go over why surety bonds are required in some of the current law. As you know, a well-functioning government depends on able and dedicated public officials. Some of these officials handle large amounts of money or have duties that, if not properly performed, could lead to financial loss for the governments. To protect the public interests, safeguards like the surety bond are necessary. Individual surety bonds have been required in Tennessee since the 19th century to protect against losses caused when public officials do not faithfully perform their official duties. The surety bond does this by providing a guarantee that the surety company will pay the governmental entity for losses caused by the public official up to the bond amount. These bonds are intended to protect the public and compensate those suffering loss or injury by reason of misconduct or neglect in office. However, these bonds do more than just cover losses. They also encourage officials to perform the duties of office by holding them personally liable or giving them skin in the game for any claims that are made against the bond. Surety companies will require the public official to reimburse them the amount paid on the claim. The amount on these bonds depends on the office, and in some cases the amount of money handled by the office. Bond amounts range from $2,000 for county surveyors up to well over $10 million for offices such as the county trustees in Shelby and Davidson counties. On page 7 of the draft, there's more details on the positions requiring the bonding along with the bond amounts. Tennessee law requires various local officials to execute these individual bonds as a prerequisite to taking office. The large majority of these positions are at the county level. There's only two city offices, and there are no state offices requiring individual surety bonds. Now I'll talk about what the bill proposes. As touched on earlier, Senate Bill 624, which can be found at Appendix A on page 22, proposed changes in the current law to allow insurance as an alternative to these individual surety bonds. More specifically, the bill would allow a governmental entity to buy a policy or cover the same risk by participating in an insurance pool, and allows any one of 3 coverage options. And I'm quoting from the bill here. Government crime coverage, employee dishonesty insurance, or equivalent coverage that ensures the faithful performance by officials and their employees of their fiduciary duties and responsibilities. Page 16 of the report provides more details about each one of these possibilities. The bill sets the minimum amount of coverage of insurance at $400,000 per occurrence. This amount would likely be too low for positions such as the county trustees. According to the legislature's Fiscal Review Office, the bill could increase local government's tort liability, which could increase their expenditure if the number of lawsuits increased. The fiscal note goes on to say the cost of insurance could be less than the cost of surety bonds, but the likely difference is impossible to determine because the coverage limits and deductibles are unknown. It's unclear that an insurance policy would provide the same coverage and safeguards as Tennessee's individual surety bond requirements, particularly as they relate to holding the individual office holders accountable. However, even if such a policy could be written and found in the marketplace, it is widely believed that it would be prohibitively expensive. While 6 other states allow insurance instead of surety bonds, no states require the insurance to be the equivalent of the public official surety bond. If it did everything a surety bond did and was available at the same cost, it would essentially be a surety bond. And in that case, there seems to be little advantage in providing insurance an alternative. If you turn to Appendix D on page 30, there's a table that looks at what other states require of their county governments, public officials, in terms of risk management. Most of these states require surety bonds, just like Tennessee. 27 of the states allow blanket coverage of some sort. 6 states allow insurance. Another 6 allow for pooling. And 4 states allow for self-insurance to be used in place of the individual surety bonds. Pages 4 and 5 of the report define these types of coverage. Now I'll talk about a possible recommendation that the Commission may want to consider. The report includes a draft recommendation based on discussion at the October meeting. The bill is not needed, at least not in its current form, but the Commission may want to consider endorsing a provision allowing a true blanket bond coverage that would provide equivalent coverage to the individual surety bonds currently required. While Tennessee law purports to allow blanket bonds in place of individual bonds, however, what it really allows is just a collection of individual bonds. The way the law is set up at Tennessee Code Annotated 819-101C, it requires a separate rider or attachment for each official with each official's signature, turning our blanket bond into a reporting form for individual bonds, not really a true blanket bond. A blanket bond is one bond that covers several officials and can be set up to provide the same safeguards and coverages as an individual bond, with liability remaining with the official. These bonds will likely be less expensive and easier to acquire because of less paperwork than having an individual bond for each official. Many states already allow for blanket bond coverage. For example, the state of Virginia buys a blanket bond, which can be found in Appendix E on page 37, the last page of the report. Virginia's bond covers multiple officials, is conditioned on faithful performance of their duties, and holds them individually accountable by allowing the company selling the bond to recover any claim paid to the state because of the failure of any office holder to faithfully perform his or her duties. Virginia's blanket bond does not require each official to have a separate rider attachment with their signatures like Tennessee's. Virginia's blanket bond could simplify the process and potentially cost less money while providing the same coverage. We spoke with Commerce and Insurance and the Comptroller's Office about the idea of allowing a blanket bond similar to Virginia's, and they have initially endorsed this idea. The draft report is presented for your review and comment. Are there any questions?
Nicely done, Nathan. Questions by the member. Senator Henry, you're recognized.
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman. I noticed in your table there are 4 states that allow self-insurance. One of them, Texas, that's okay. The other 3 I point out to you, California, Illinois, and Louisiana. So I recommend that we not go into self-insurance.
Right. Well, and all kidding aside, I sponsored the bill that prompted this discussion. It was not a caption bill because it couldn't survive in that form. It's a little bit better than that, but it was really designed to try and ferret out some cost savings for governments. And I think in a roundabout way we may have gotten to that point now, talking about the blanket bond idea. Senator Tracy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to say, I think what we're going to do today is just sort of move forward. I would support the idea of moving forward to looking at giving the local municipalities an option, maybe to save money, and give them an option to do that. I've been in the insurance business for a long time. I understand the concept of this, so I would support the idea of looking at it further if that's what your intention is.
I think I'm intrigued by the blanket bond idea. I think Representative Carter, and then I'll Mr. McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I echo what Senator just said. I think it would be good to, it's opened up a discussion that really needs to be discussed because this is a very complex issue. And I know with some of the local governments that I deal with, they're really confused. And I think having a further discussion and moving it forward to be able to look at other alternatives and blanket bonds and so forth would be the right way to go. So I support what you said, Senator.
Now, Representative Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When this first started, I was amazed at how I could not reconcile these positions in my mind. I just couldn't figure out what we were headed toward. I was with some people in Chattanooga one day, and our county mayor, and I proposed this, and that insurance person said, look, all I need you all to do is make it quicker, easier, and cheaper. And what I need you to do is make the blanket bond applicable. Get the comptroller to agree to the amounts, and that'll solve me a many days' work. And I thought, I'm sure not what TACIR is looking at, but if that will cure the problem, maybe that will overlook the fact that we can't distinguish between bonds and insurance company. That's just beyond my ability to grasp. So I was going to ask today, I had no idea that it was going to go so easy, but if I will be happy to get with them and let them draw what they think they need and circulate it. I think it applies only to the counties. Am I wrong in that? I'm not sure. The municipalities have government or have required bonds. Do they, Mayor?
I believe that it's at the discretion of the local government.
Okay, I know the Constitution and various statutes has got a real mishmash for our county mayors, but I think what they want is quicker, easier, and cheaper, right? And so if we can really simplify this where I can understand it, and let's just see if it's possible to apply the blanket bond statewide, then we can take a very complex issue and boil it down to something very simple. And that's the only way I'm going to be able to understand it. But I'd be happy to put something together and circulate it back to the full board or to a committee or whatever you want to see if that might answer the solution. We shot at one thing, we may hit something better.
Right. Mayor Burgess, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question, and maybe someone here knows this. With the blanket bonds, would the official owe a duty of indemnification to the surety just like we are required under the surety bonds?
Yeah.
Yes, Representative Carter.
Well, anything that I would support would have to have that. Without that, you got nothing. I mean, remember, when that public official signs on that bond, they're saying I'm putting all of my personal assets at risk, to be honest. And if I'm not, then you can come back and get my farm or my truck or my motorcycle or whatever. And that's, to me, essential to the process. That's where I got lost in the insurance bonding part. I was afraid we were going to escape that. So it looks like if we could pass one law that brings all this together, it might be an enormous help to counties.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard some figures that are very impressive in terms of potential savings. I wouldn't rely on them yet. I don't fully understand the cost differential, but that's really what I was after, was trying to find a simpler and more cost-effective way to get the job done. So it's great. I appreciate that input, and I think that will be, this was not before us for a vote today, but let's see if we can get to that point at our next meeting then. Put that on the agenda also for our January meeting, correct? Yes.
I'm new at all this. Should I just put together a little prototype and send it to Lenise and let her send it out to you county, ladies and gentlemen, that understand it much better than me, and just if you'll poke holes in it and try and get it straight. Is that the proper protocol?
That's fine with the chair. There's no objection. Many hands make light work.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, and also Comptroller's office and Commerce and Insurance will weigh in on it, I'm sure, all to the good. Yeah, that's great. Good. Well, thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.
That'll do. I guess this is the point where I just love to go into tomorrow's agenda, but that would not be well advised. I do want to say that, well, why not? But I'm sure all of you have reviewed the materials that we will take up tomorrow in this book, what is behind tab 5, and just some initial discussion, if we could, about the format. I'll say it today and then I'll repeat this tomorrow, but staff has worked incredibly hard in trying to review and update and assimilate what all has gone into Chapter 1101 and what needs to be committed to writing in order to not only meet the mandate, the letter of Public Chapter 441, but the spirit of what we're trying to do. Because remember, again, we recognized before Representative Carter and Senator Watson's bill that we're nearly 15 years into the 20-year growth plans, and none of us had ever really caused anybody to stop and take stock of where we were in that process and consider what happens at the end of 20 years and the hold harmless and all those issues. Then along came the bill, and then the focus on the discussion about annexation and other things. The the amendment to the bill that imposed the moratorium on annexations while we consider this charged TACIR with making recommendations. And you can make a recommendation not to make a recommendation, but that wouldn't be good. And you could make a specific recommendation to the exclusion of other recommendations if you could get a consensus, but that wouldn't serve the General Assembly very well at all, because the General Assembly is going to do whatever the General Assembly wants to do. They're looking to TACIR for recommendations that help them make the best decision as to legislation in the final analysis. So I like the approach the staff has taken behind tab 5, which is to put down, if not every item, the best of the recommendations that have been made in these various areas. They're in the shaded areas and otherwise discussed, so that what you'll be asked to consider is whether tomorrow or in January, and I'll come back to that in a moment, making a report out of TACIR that says, look, here are several things that could be done. We don't presume to tell the General Assembly what to do, but after several months of study, these are all valid approaches, and we leave it to you to make the decision as to what you think is best. We'll hear tomorrow, that there are collateral ramifications to any one that the General Assembly may pick, whether it's what was proposed in the original bill filed by Representative Carter, or as amended. They all have collateral ramifications one way or another. This sort of reminds me, and I may repeat this tomorrow, of the wine and grocery stores debate, believe it or not, because when you talk about people's right to vote, which I support, and I think every recommendation has that component in it, people's right to vote. Who could deny that? But it's what they're voting on. And that's what this report sort of challenges you to think about. Vote on annexation, yes or no? Well, maybe it ought to be a vote on an amended growth plan. Maybe it ought to be a vote. People ought to have the right to express themselves, but what the vote is, what it's on, how the vote is cast, how it's counted, those are all other issues. So I'm excited about the content of what we will consider tomorrow. We may hear from a few more folks now that this takes this form. I want to know if anybody objects to the format that is before us for discussion tomorrow, instead of just picking one or the other or saying too complicated, we're not picking any of them. Here's what we've heard. Mayor Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any objection. I just wanted to get clear. Now, on 1101 issues with annexation separate, the 1101 issues, have we already agreed that that's going to continue down the road?
Now, is your question whether TACIR is going to continue doing more analysis, or whether you mean that the growth plans continue at the end of 20 years?
Are changes to 1101, changes to the growth plan legislation, is that an issue that's going to continue with a report or recommendation later on, or is that going to come up tomorrow?
I think it's,
along with the annexation legislation. I was a little bit murky about that the last time.
Well, that's a really good point, because, as I say, we were taking a broader look. TACIR wanted to look at where we were in several aspects of 1101, and annexation, it could be said, it becomes the tail that wags the dog from time to time. It's a component. So my response to your question is that we have a broader charge beyond Public Chapter 441, and for that reason, we may want to continue this discussion at a minimum into January. I mean, there are other things to talk about, the hold harmless and all those things that are of importance. So broader than just annexation, but the annexation issue needs to be addressed. That's one of the questions I asked Sam Edwards early on. You may remember, is the annexation issue integral or incidental to our analysis of 1101? And he nicely said, well, it's incidental. And it's an important incident, but there's more to it than just that. I hope that answers your question. Lanice, did you want to comment?
I just wanted to clarify that 441 required a review of both Chapter 51 and 58. 58 was completely created by PC 1101. It didn't exist prior to PC 1101, and that aspect of 441 has a deadline of January 14 as well. So we have in the report some work on Chapter 58 in order to meet that deadline.
Yeah, Mayor Huffman.
Mr. Chairman, and that's what I was confused about, because the last time it sounded like we were going to continue the discussion, the analysis of 1101 and what we were going to do, even though we had a deadline coming up. So I was just trying to get clear on exactly where we were on that. And I remember in 1995, Chairman John Bragg was here, and he said when we got into annexations back in 1995, really what we're talking about is how do we want Tennessee to grow? It's a large view, strategic plan of how do we want this state to grow. And when you step back and look at the big picture, that's what you're talking about. And then as you focus it down, I'm just trying to get a little clearer about tomorrow what we may be considering and what we may not be considering.
I think this begins to clarify it, and it'll become clearer as we proceed. We've had discussion, too, at the last meeting as to whether we, in order to meet the January deadline as written, we really need to agree on a report tomorrow. However, there has been some consensus maybe forming that, well, we'd like to talk further into January, and would the General Assembly frown on that? How would we deal with that aspect that imposed the deadline? And there's been some discussion as well about whether the moratorium be extended for an additional period, so we could talk about a lot of things, and that's not resolved. I think TACIR staff has done a remarkable job in getting us to a point where if we need to vote tomorrow on a report, I think we can. And it may be that everybody feels their positions are being adequately represented, that nobody's uncomfortable giving us some more time. But I think it'll become clearer in the fullness of time, with your help and God's. All right, if there's nothing further today, yes, Mr. Vice Chairman.
I want to comment about Commissioner Davis. We're glad she's back. She had a little bad bout of bad luck when we met last time, and we all sent out prayers for her and her family.
Thank you. All right, if there's nothing further for the good of the order today, we will stand in recess until tomorrow. Now, we're going to meet in room 29 tomorrow, so don't show up at whatever room we're in. Go to room 29. Thank you. See you in the morning. Yes, it's right next door.
You take our books in, don't we?
Well, if you take your materials with you, it'll be easier, but if you don't, I'm sure our competent staff will get them to us. Thank you very much.
Be sure they're neat.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.